Now, don't wait to start this plan. This is it. This is all there is. All of us have just what we need if we take a breath. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. Why do we worry and act so stressed? What causes us?
This workshop with PK Mudge and Victoria Couquet, who I will let introduce themselves. But we basically, just the origin story of this workshop quickly is that the three of us were actually on the advisory panel for this conference together. And I don't know, the idea of activism and burnout came up, and the three of us just kind of been like, yeah, we'd like to do something on that, and this workshop was born. So the three of us have never formally worked together as a group. We are not a formal organization. We are just three women who are very interested in unpacking some of the dimensions and complications and difficulties and joys and hardships of working within activist movements, whether you're at the helm or you're a part of those movements. I also, just for context, at Apathy is Boring, work a lot with young people. So I'm so grateful that we'll get to have a bit of an intergenerational dialogue today around some of these challenges. I find it really valuable to learn from such amazing women who have been doing this work for a long time. So just personally, I'm really grateful to have all of you, and obviously PK is going to do the introductions in a moment. One of the things that we're hoping to come out of today, other than obviously buying Farzana's book, as we've already discussed, is really just to understand a little bit more how to help ourselves, but also how to help the people around us as we're sort of working on these incredibly challenging and difficult issues in our work. And I think all of us, whether you're at the helm of an organization or a movement, you're a leader, or you're someone who's working sort of to advance the cause at any level, that we all can take responsibility for the cultivation and growth of a positive culture within activism. And we are going to try and get a little spicy today and talk a little bit about some of the cultural elements that can lead to burnout. So those are the expectations. The way we're sort of defining it today, we've used the word cancel culture. We can debate whether or not that's the right term, whether that's the right framing, but the crux of what we're trying to get at a little bit today is just understanding how the expectations that others place on us and the expectations that we then put on ourselves and the enforcement of those expectations, ideas, language, whatever you want to say, can lead and does in fact lead to burnout all the time. And how, if we want to build more sustainable movements, how can we as individuals think about our collective well-being and health as part of that? And so I'm really looking forward to unpacking that. We're obviously a small group, so we had thought maybe about doing like breakout groups. I think we might shift our structure a little bit after the workshop so we can all kind of chat, but first we're going to have about a 20-minute discussion with PK and these wonderful ladies. So I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Victoria. All right, we are so delighted to be here at Democracy Exchange, and this is such an important conversation. We know that we all agree that if we want to change, we also need radical spaces and cultures to be open, rooted in love, trust, and care, and build the capacity to support and defend each other as people who are trying to make change. But we also know that radical spaces can be anything but loving or kind, right? And it results in the loss of an important source of power and energy, the people who actually care. In this book here, Joyful Militancy, by Nick Montgomery and Carla Bergman, they talk about this as something called rigid radicalism. And that is when radical spaces start policing themselves and others to conform to their own sense of what the correct way of being and talking about the issue is. And thereby weakening and destroying movements by tasering the individual radical change makers' capacity to be responsible, but also inventive, joyful, and learning space, and enjoying radical spaces. So we want to talk today about how to thrive and build resistance to unproductive toxicity in radical spaces. And so, with that in mind, we have two radicals here today who are very experienced and have a lot of, can talk quite well about their experiences and also their resistance. Both have had tremendous impact on society, culture, and structure as a result of their activist work. So I'm going to introduce them briefly.
That's too long.
Judy's looking at my notes. She always said
Look how
that.
long that is. You
I
take it
know,
2
I know.
minutes, and then my 5 minutes is up.
I'll shorten it.
Okay.
Okay, as you can see, Judy takes no shit. But she is a celebrated journalist and political activist. I'm going to skip down to a bunch of things and just say, for all of the, one of the reasons Canada has access to abortion here and access to reproductive rights is because of Judy and her colleagues. So I'm always surprised when I am in other feminist spaces that some folks say they've never heard of Judy Rebick. So we need to remedy that. I'm on a campaign to remedy that. She's the author of 9 books, and I brought one of hers today, Heroes in My Head, and she's also in a documentary chronicling her life called Judy versus Capitalism. I love it because there she steps in front of an enraged man with garden shears attempting to assault Dr. Morgan Tyler at the opening of the clinic, basically threatening your own life, Judy. So, okay, that's Judy Rebick. No big deal, that's right. Farzana. Farzana is also a writer, activist, and psychotherapist, which is very useful for our conversation today. Her ancestry is Indian. She was born in Zambia, where her family was based there before emigrating to Canada. Don't worry, it's not too long, Farzana. But her activist work is primarily in environmental issues, gender violence, and LGBTQ, IS2, etc. rights. And she's well known as a writer and currently volunteers with We Speak Out, a global group that is working to ban female genital cutting in her Dawoodi Bohra community. And she's also the person behind the Dear Mazi, a new sex and relationships column for FMGC survivors. And she also co-founded the End Female Genital Mutilation Canada Network. She has just released her new book here, 52 Weeks to a Sweeter Life for Caregivers, Activists, and Helping Professions. So that's our group today. And let's get into some of the stories, okay? So let me start with Judy. Tell us about your activist work, and specifically a time when your work or you came under attack, and how you felt about it, and what impact did it have?
Well, I mean, I've always been under attack, so that's basically true. But the generational stuff is like when I was young, we always fought all the time. It was just part of what we did. We were constantly arguing and fighting, and you took a stand and you fought for it, and then that person took a stand and they fought for it, and we had factions, we had, but we still talked to each other. Okay, nobody got canceled, nobody got excluded, right, because of their opinion. But we didn't know anything about psychology, we didn't know anything about supporting each other, nothing like that. Like so for example, when I stepped in front of the guy with the garden shears, so first thing you should know is it's not admirable what I did. I was just dysfunctional. I was dissociated, and I felt no fear. I felt no fear. I never felt fear until I was about 50-something, okay? Never, or anxiety, okay? So everybody should know that, because it is not it's not, so in that sense, I wasn't so much courageous as I was dysfunctional, but in a good way. I put it to good use, okay? A lot of people are dysfunctional in this way, put it to bad use, like serial killers, But for my case, I was, for various reasons, which I go into in the book, I was able to put it to good use. And I stepped in front of the guy with the garden shears because I wasn't afraid, basically. But my subconscious was afraid, right? I just couldn't feel it. So after this happened, there was a friend there who was a psychologist. She took me behind the clinic, and she got me to sort of let go a bit of the fear, which is what allowed me to do all the interviews and all that I did. But the thing I want to say about that is I was in therapy at the time, which I was only in because I had become completely dysfunctional as a result of this trauma and dissociation, and I went into a clinical depression. So I'd come out of the clinical depression and got involved in the pro-choice struggle, okay, but I was still in therapy, and I called my therapist after I saw it on TV, okay? I saw it on TV, and then Henry called me, Dr. Morgenthaler called me, and he said, Judy, I wish to thank you, I'll never forget this, he said, Judy, I wish to thank you for saving my life. And I said, don't exaggerate. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't going to kill you. Like, it was garden shears. It wasn't like, whatever. But then it made me realize that I was in danger, right? So I called the therapist, and he said, and he told me I shouldn't go to work. I was going to go to work the next day, yeah, that I should go home and just rest. And when I did that, I actually started to cry, and I cried for about, and I never cried. I cried for about 3 hours and let it go. So I think that's important about burnout, right? That one of the things that causes burnout, there's two things that cause burnout. One's trauma, right? And the other is working too hard. And I did both all the time. My ex tells me that I used to work, because I think now, oh, I get so tired. And he says, you just got tired. Like, you'd work and work and work and work and work and work, and then you'd collapse for 2 weeks. I don't remember that being like that, right? But that's the way I was, and that was how I dealt with burnout. Not a good way to deal with burnout, right? Not a good way. So nowadays, I think, and this is from my own students that I know this, because I do teach, is that people are afraid of saying anything that isn't acceptable, whatever that might be. They're terrified that they won't have any friends if they express. So I had a student last year who supported the trucker convoy, okay? A black student who supported the trucker convoy. Very right-wing guy. And what he would do is every day after class he would come and argue with me, right? So I said, why do you come and argue with me? Why don't you say something in class? It would make the class more interesting. And he said, because nobody would ever talk to me again, right? And so one of the qualities I've always had, partially because of this dissociation, and partially because I grew up with a father who was a bully, but was also really funny, okay? And I saw how he used humor to really get away with all the bullshit he did, right? So I learned to use humor to deal with difference. And so when I got interviewed for this job on Face Off, which was a right-left debate show on CBC, I used humor to deal with Claire Hoy, who was this really very right-wing guy, okay? And the other two people interviewed were Naomi Klein and who wasn't as famous as she is now, and Linda McQuaig. Both of them were much better known journalists than I was, but both of them couldn't cope with the guy. He just made them too angry, right? So I think a lot of what causes burnout is working too hard and internalizing everything, and not, I don't know, then as a psychologist I'm not, but I think learning how to talk about things that are bothering you is a big quality. I don't think it's an accident we have more men than women in this room, even though it's all women speaking, because men are worse at that than women, right? You know, I don't think you're born that way. I think that's how you're raised, right? And so I think that talking stuff out is really important. And also, like I say, Susanna's book is really great about stuff like that. She calls it internalized capitalism, which I love. But anyway, so that's what I think is that you have to take care of yourself, but that doesn't, and that, like, I don't like the idea of self-care as protection. That's what worries me about the self-care language, is that you're protecting yourself from conflict. You don't have to protect yourself from conflict, right? Well, you do with these, okay, I'm going to swear, okay, with these assholes who attack you, you know, like, oh, I thought you were dead. That was the last one I got, you know. Like, and I want to, what I want to do, part of me wants to do is say, well, you're not paying very much attention. But I don't now. I would have done that like 10 years ago, but I don't now, because who needs to engage an idiot like that, right? So be able to distinguish between who's worth talking to and who's not, because there are people you can't talk to no matter what. But also, conflict is not bad. Conflict is good, can be good, if you can learn something from it, if you listen and you talk and you have conflict. You know, like Karen is here, we mentioned this in the last workshop. She and I went to camp together, okay? And she's supported Israel critically, but still all her life, and I haven't. Like, I turned against Israel after I went there in 1970. And so we managed to talk about this stuff. We don't agree on many things, we agree on other things, right? And I think that conflict, one of the problems right now is people are like it's like if you have a disagreement, it goes from 0 to 100 in 6 seconds, right? And it doesn't have to. It really doesn't have to, because most people you can find common ground somewhere with. Not everybody, but somewhere with. And I'll end on this. I guess where I learned that was in the pro-choice struggle, because in the pro-choice struggle, you had people who were really fanatics, right? Like, people were very fanatical about being against abortion. They think abortion's murder. They think doctors who perform abortion should be executed. You know, like, they're really fanatic. You can't talk to those people. But they influence people, and you can talk to those people, and there's way more of them than there are of the fanatics. Okay? So I think I guess that's all I wanted to say.
Right, thank you, Judy. And a perfect segue then into Farzana's story. As a psychotherapist as well, we'll have some things to say about that. So Farzana, tell us about some of your activist history and moments that might have contributed to Burnout.
First of all, thanks for having me here, and thank you to all of you for being here. I have a feeling that you're all pretty amazing, kick-ass people, so and hopefully we'll learn more about that in a minute. I've been an activist since my teens, but I thought I would talk about a specific experience from more recently, and part of what was the impetus for getting this book out as well. And I have notes because I'm perimenopausal and my brain doesn't work as well these days in terms of my memory. Hopefully that changes. So I see burnout on a continuum, and I think of it as like from kind of crispy to all the way burnt out and exhausted and like you're done and you can't do anything. And oh yeah.
Anybody feeling crispy?
It's crispy right now. A little bit of crispy, yeah. So, and I've been at, all over that continuum, many, many times. And what I see is our jobs really is to not avoid burnout, but to recognize when we're somewhere on that continuum, and hopefully we get better and better at recognizing when we're in the crispy department and not the exhausted and devastated area. So I'll talk to you about one moment in 2016 when I was doing end FGMC work, where I got actually to the wrong end of the continuum. And I think for me it was multifactorial. So, Judy said, it's trauma, it's overwork, so it was that. And I also think that when we're working on activist issues that are really very personal, have to do with our own identities, have to do with our own struggles and traumas, there's greater risk of burnout. So I was, dealing with my own trauma around FGMC as well as working on the issues. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is, because I was trying to parse out, like, what happened there? How did it get so bad for me? I was also working with an organization that was just starting. And, at the beginning, when we're starting organizations, it's incredibly chaotic. We don't have the structures, there's no money. Everyone is, spending all of their leisure time on this, starting an organization. There's a lot of arguments about how best to do things. You're doing a lot of that storming stuff. There might be a lot of differences amongst people. You have the similarities around the particular issue, but in particular with this group, there was.
We talked about cancel culture and specifically whether it's a good or useful term. A couple of examples that were brought up were around like the forgiveness piece for law students at TMU who were like harassed into oblivion by really powerful people. But the idea that like this is not a new phenomenon, it happens when our society is highly polarized. What's new, however, is the fear and the online aspect. And so the online aspect really changing the physics of it, where a small number of people can spread a massive amount of disinformation. Like 30 accounts can like reach millions of people. And so it doesn't take a lot of capital. It doesn't take having a very large number of people decide to spread hate for you to be really, really negatively affected. And specifically, even in this case, like AstroTurf groups and like these kinds of like capitalist forces are able to like leverage that efficiency much, much better than regular people. And so you still have the power of like capital and institutions really bearing down on individuals. Then there was also a discussion about like the distinction between what it means for somebody to be canceled and how it is different when it happens to quote unquote regular people versus when it happens to really powerful people. So the idea of somebody like J.K. Rowling or Gilgamesh being either roundly criticized or fired for doing or saying heinous things in public is very different from somebody who, for example, might share a nuanced take on whether or not our vaccine passing regulation is too loose and is immediately told that you're an anti-vaxxer and how that might stifle that conversation. And then like one specific exigent idea around the people who are maybe most affected by this are like public and elected representatives, and how there's been a rash of, what are you saying, hundreds of people who have been quitting, like specifically because they have received a massive amount of online harassment. And like coming back to this point about a small number of people or one person being able to output a ton of hate, having somebody be stalked and doxxed because they passed a deer hunting law in a place where deer were overpopulated. And so ultimately, like, we come to this place of like cancel being a tricky word and something that is like pretty used differently in different places, but that while we should still be able to criticize powerful people, and that has always happened, what we shouldn't let it do is, or shouldn't have the fear of it do, especially in this like online moment, is prevent dialogue and allow us to eliminate nuance and use it to bring it to bear against regular people who are looking to engage in important conversations.
Oh my God!
You can do it.
I don't know about
Yes.
that. Thank you for that, guys. So we kind of focused on finding a pathway back and whether this kind of finding a pathway back kind of works within the echo chamber of social media, more specifically Twitter. We've come to the agreement that solving things through a Twitter thread is not exactly useful. It doesn't work. So some of the points that we had were that so our hypothetical situation was essentially that someone tweeted something problematic and what it would require for them to, I guess, find that pathway back. So one thing that we discussed was that there needs to be a willingness to learn, and sort of in that sort of pathway, they need to demonstrate accountability, because a lot of it is about intent. We talked a lot about intent, and a lot of people on Twitter, some are not open to dialogue, and you kind of need to gauge, if you are going to engage in those conversations, you need to gauge what these kinds of people are, because you have some people on one end that will twist your words, they don't want to talk about it. So you need to find some of that like sort of shared language to communicate. And depending on their reaction after being called out, you kind of need to gauge whether these people are worth having a dialogue with, or if they're just going to contribute to negativity in general. And depending on the position of power of these people and their level of influence, they need to be, I don't want to say shamed accordingly, but they need to be held accountable in that light. So with a regular person, maybe you'd private message them or something, initiate a dialogue privately, but with like someone in political power, because there's that aspect of influence, you need to approach that with maybe a little bit of shame, but also there has to be, because there is that level of influence, you have to be a little bit more harsher. And yeah, just have it be as an invitation to act in solidarity. So those are some of our points.
Another round of applause.